Are you a snail of an artist, disappointed and dumping out of every project? As a fellow perfectionist, I know how you feel. And while you watch me draw this today, learn how I overcame my perfectionism, what the real root causes of it is, because it isn't what you think it is, and how I learned to work with my perfectionism instead of against it like you currently are right now. And your recovery starts right now. So at the core of being a perfectionist, okay, let's talk about your symptoms and what you're currently feeling, and then I'm going to tell you what you're actually feeling and what the real root cause of it is. Because as a perfectionist artist, what are you going to do? You're going to say that you're extremely slow, that you struggle to work on anything for long periods of time, that you struggle with maintaining your creativity, that you struggle with keeping up your motivation, right? You find yourself always getting to the same point and then, something happens and boom, you just can't stick with it anymore. Am I right? Am I talking about you right now? And at the real root of perfectionism, you just have an issue not with making everything look as good as possible, not with you being a professional, not with you trying to level up everything that you do all the time, overwhelmingly, like I'm going to warn you against as we go through this video today. But instead, it's real simple. You just have a problem with beginning and finishing things. Look, that's really all it is. It's real bare bones, basic and simple, is that you need to see yourself as starting something, and that is really the root cause of it, because you have these great ideas, you have these amazing conceptions of what you would like to do, what you would like to be, what you would like to do with it, what you like your project to turn into, right? And then you actually get hit with the actual work and something happens. There's a disconnect that occurs. And then you start to meander through these perfectionism kind of mindsets and habits like I'll talk to you about today. And that's really what it is. But at the core of it, it is just starting something and investing something all the way through. And I'm not going to be ambiguous about this. I'm going to let you know exactly how you can and should combat this in order to be more successful. Now, let me ask, at what point do you feel like you actually start to adopt this mindset that you are a perfectionist? Like, at what point in you actually creating something are you just all of a sudden assuming the don and mantle of just like, I am a perfectionist. Everything I have to do has to look perfect. Everything that I do must be magnificent. It has to be at the highest level. It has to be at the highest caliber. And I'm going to tell you, it's not at the part that you enjoy. It's not at the part where you feel the most fulfilled. It's not at the part at all where you're actually going to feel like you're making great progress. No, Fred. It's the complete opposite of that, isn't it? It's when you meet difficulty. It's when you start to get into that part of your process, and let me know what it is for you down below, because I think everybody's got a different version of this. But once you start to hit that ugly phase, and you know what phase I'm talking about, don't you? It's the phase where you felt really good about it, and then, this doesn't look so good anymore. Oh, I don't know about that. Ooh, that face looks jacked up, or like, what's up with those hands? You know what I'm talking about? Am I talking about you? But there's actually something worse I'm going to talk to you about later today. And every single time that you hit that bar and you run into that kind of wall of failure, and something doesn't look right, something doesn't look to your standards, something doesn't look to your imagination, right? That is not a bad thing, okay? And then that exposes this as well. You have an issue with failure, my friend. You have an issue with confronting challenge. And this is one of the things that I learned for myself too, because every single time that I would hit those ugly phases, and listen, I still hit those ugly phases. That never goes away, friend. If you're just like, man, I'm just gonna work myself until this doesn't happen anymore. I'm gonna have a better idea. I'm gonna have a better project, and it'll never happen again. That's complete nonsense, and it will always happen. You'll always hit those ugly phases. But what I learned, and what I would like for you to potentially adopt the philosophy of, is this as well, is that failure is part of the recipe for success. It's an ingredient in it, okay? Most of us are trying to run away from failure. Most of us are trying to run away from challenge. Most of us are just trying to stay in our comfort zones and only do to the point of the process, in which case we really like it, and then boom, we dump out of it, and then we start to exhibit perfectionist qualities, like I'll kind of warn you about and talk to you about today. Then we just shut down, and then we start to go through it, and then inevitably what happens? Then you stop, right? And listen, once you start to recognize that is the truth of it, then you can actually utilize perfectionism in order to propel you forward, in order to be a tool in your tool belt, in order to be a superpower for you as well. How would that sound for you? Because I'm just gonna go on a limb here and say, it probably sucks right now, doesn't it? But it doesn't have to. Now, with my interactions with thousands of artists just like you, I've encountered this really common phenomena, and I wonder if this might be it for you too. You see, for people like me that are professional artists in their day job, and then you get out of your day job, and then you get home, and then do you ever feel like you just don't have the same approach? And tell me, this can be anything. This can just be, for you as a contract artist, for you that's just taking commissions. Do you ever feel like you don't have these perfectionism issues when you're doing your professional work? Are you actually able to tell yourself and disassociate from that and be like, okay, well, this is just for the work, it's just for the gig, it's just for the job, so on and so forth. But then when it comes time for you to actually sit down and plug yourself into like what you actually, want to do, something that you were excited about, all of a sudden, like everything starts to crumble. And I used to have this problem too, where like I'd have my own characters I wanted to make, and I would come home from work and I'd just be like, I got nothing. Like, this is just so overwhelming and stressful. Have you felt this way too? And whether or not you struggle with one or the other of those, here's what I want to urge you to understand is that if you're capable of learning how to disassociate yourself from perfectionism type of habits in one aspect, you're capable of doing it in another. The issue here, though, especially I see with personal work, is that it's a matter of care. See, when you are actually working on something personally relevant for you, personally meaningful for you, right here, that you designed, that nobody told you to do, right? You care significantly more about it. Makes sense, it's actually quite nice, isn't it? However, though, you care to such an extent that you think to yourself things like, I have to make it great, I have to make it wonderful, I have to make it the best. And this creates an enormous amount of stress onto you. And as I go through practical strategies with this, it's got to start with this. You have to learn in your artwork specifically what to actually care about. You have to actually identify certain targets, because if y'all want to know the number one worst mindset to have approaching any artwork, personally or professionally, it's this. Don't ever approach your artwork thinking, this has to be amazing, this has to be the best, this has to be the greatest, this has to be portfolio ready. If you approach it like that, first off, that's an unspecific target, because inevitably, if you're expecting it to be the most wonderful thing you've ever done, and on the other end of that, you're also afraid that it's not going to be the most wonderful thing you've ever done, guess what? You're going to lean more into the fear than into the hope of it, simply because you don't have specific targets. So here are 3 things that I would make sure that you identify in every artwork that you do. Number 1, what's the focus of it? What do you want me to look at first? Number 2, what's the mood of this piece? How do you want me to feel emotionally when I look at this? And then number 3, what's the learning outcome that you want to achieve from it? You have something new to learn in every single artwork that you do. If you simply identify those 3 things, your perfectionism won't come in as hard, because you actually have something concrete, some type of actual measurable outcome to achieve, rather than it has to look good, which it probably won't to your standard, because you are approaching it with an unhealthy mindset. You see how that works? And as you're switching from a personal to professional, I want to urge you to do this. What if you adopted those same philosophies from your professional work into your personal work? Because if you're capable of doing it in one place, you're capable of transferring it to another. How's that sound? Now, let me tell you my number 1 powerhouse tip for how I fight perfectionism, but more importantly though, I actually don't fight it, I work with it, and here's how I do this. And when you assume that you are a perfectionist, right? You are probably working very slow in a very concentrated areas. Am I talking about you? Are you working at like an hour and a half of just kind of rendering out that nose, or like 45 minutes with a single wisp of hair, or you're working on a single finger for like 3 hours? What I want you to reconsider your perfectionism as, in how you're rendering and how you're approaching your artwork and where you're focusing your energy and your efforts, simply like this. I want you to think of perfectionism as a switch, not like a destructive monkey that's just running around your brain with a wrench and screwing up everything, okay? And what we also need to really identify at the core of what perfectionism is, y'all, it's procrastination from doing the things that you don't want to do. It's procrastination from you wanting to avoid the things that are difficult and in favor of you doing tasks that you feel comfortable with. And the issue that this becomes and that arises from this is that you're just not using your time efficiently. So what I want to urge you instead is to reconsider this. Practice a non-committal attitude for the majority of your project. And I want you to use perfectionism as a switch that you turn on for the last 20% of it. So this has been something game-changing for me. And as I've been developing my skills and developing my practices, developing my process, it's gonna be a little bit different for you too, but it'll generally look like this. I'm gonna practice a non-committal attitude as I'm gonna be going through this drawing process. So even as you're watching me paint right now, okay, here's generally what my process looks like, is that I'm gonna do my lines, and then I'm gonna go ahead and do basic colors over the entire piece. Then I'm gonna do a soft indication of lighting all over the entire piece. And it typically looks pretty graphic nowadays. And then I'm gonna come back to it and I'm gonna do a little bit of a render on everything. I'm gonna start that on everything. Then I'm gonna do a little bit of a texture pass on everything. And then I'm gonna turn on my perfectionism and say, okay, Sean, ready to go. It's like a caged beast. And I'm ready to actually come in, now that I have everything, like 70, 80% done, then I'm gonna come in and actually make everything look exactly what it needs to look like. And from doing this, you are going to feel much better, because the problem with perfectionism, if you haven't realized it yet, is that you just let it out too early. You're just unleashing it upon your artwork when it's not prepared for it. It's almost like if somebody came around and graded a test you were taking in the middle of you taking it instead of at the end of it. You see where I'm going with this? And there are other forces at play here too that I want to alert you to, because it's not that simple. And if you want to adopt a philosophy where you actually feel good about your artwork while you're in process, then think about the things as we're going through this video as far as how they're going to affect you, because all of this is holistically impacting you right now, whether you realize it or not. Now, another issue that you might encounter while you're trying to be a better artist is that you forgot to hit that like and subscribe button. Come on, y'all. I'm giving you weekly advice just like this. Practical, actual advice that nobody else on YouTube is. And if you want to come along for that ride, make sure that you ride with me too. And hey, if this is helpful for you, make sure that you share it with somebody that you know. And then also make sure you're aware of this one. Now, I want to approach a really heavy topic that you've never heard, but this is a major invasive issue I've seen with everybody that suffers from perfectionism, and this was my case too, okay? Most of our entire lives, I want to just let you know that you are really not trained on how to care for yourself and care for your artwork, or just generally just care for the things that you want to care about. And this invades your artwork, and this is kind of the genesis for where perfectionism lies, is that you just don't feel comfortable doing things that you actually like, that you actually enjoy. And when you get the opportunity to, it feels really foreign. I'm gonna explain it to you like this, because most of your life, in case you didn't know this, you're trained into absolute servitude. And just look back at your life and tell me if this sounds like you. First off, when you're born, you're in servitude to your parents. Then you're in servitude to your teachers. Then you're in servitude to your employer. And then if you have a family, you're in servitude to that part too. So there's 4 really big forces at which point you are a servant to them. And then when it comes time for you, especially in your adulthood, as those start to compound on top of each other, you just start to lose yourself, and you just feel like you're putting all of this care and all of this effort and all of this focus into those things. And then when you actually sit down to actually create something for yourself, are you like, I just don't feel like I have much in the tank? Or you also, as perfectionism presents itself, is actually you have a hyper fixation. You're like, oh, I finally get time for myself. I actually care about this. I actually want to do this. And then you self-sabotage yourself. And why is that? Because you've been trained into a life of servitude. And the thing that I want to help you reconsider is just this. You actually going through this process like I'm explaining today, and you understanding how to combat your perfectionism is actually a means for you to learn to care about yourself and invest into yourself. And if you are adopting these habits that perfectionists tend to have, like myself, like a lot of people that I know that are self-proclaimed perfectionists, you're actually combating your way of taking care of yourself and investing into the things that you want. It's just self-sabotage. You're just trying to self-implode and fight against it because your conditioned nature is to not do anything for yourself. Have you ever considered that? So to have a way to practically get around this, I've really learned that I have to, as a means of developing myself, as a means of combating this attitude of servitude, I need to make sure that I'm making time, I'm scheduling time, and at the end of every single project, even if it isn't the most glorious thing, I learned something and I did something for myself. Because a lot of what society will teach you to do is to be a contributor for somebody else. But I just want to let you know, society's not going to care about you when you die, okay? Literally in like 3 generations, nobody will even know your name. So why would you work harder for something and somebody and some people that don't care about you when really the only person that cares about you is you? You ever thought about that? Now, I want to let you know that there is a really big, dark, ominous force that's present amongst all perfectionism. And it typically starts with what you're doing once you encounter your perfectionism. Now, listen, You might be somebody who's a hard perfectionist, and like you are somebody who's just toils and slaves away over the same thing for the same amount of time. And then inevitably what happens? Then your tank empties creatively and energetically speaking, and then you stop. Then you drop the project. Are you one of these people that has like just a graveyard of unfinished projects? Do you never finish anything either because it doesn't meet your standard, it's not up to your level, it doesn't hit your expectations, right? The reason why you do that and then what you do afterwards is so common isn't because you're lazy, it isn't because you're incapable, it isn't because you're not talented, it isn't because your mom and dad were right about your artistic future, right? Here's what it actually is. It's this force that's called resistance. And Steven Pressfield wrote about this in his book, The War for Art. And basically, resistance is the #1 inhibiting factor to why you are a perfectionist. So what does it look like when you're a perfectionist? Well, typically, you're gonna go ahead and you're gonna work on small areas at a time. And then you're gonna laboriously go through certain things at a certain pace. But here's what I want you to call into question. Why are you doing that? And this generally comes down to your process. And you wanna just take a look at like, okay, should I be doing this? What is the focus of this right now? Like, what should I be done? How can I make more progress? What could I do? And what I see that perfectionists tend to do way too often and way too comfortably, mind you too, is that you tend to just take an absurd amount of time on the same things for a long period of time. So a way that I found to combat this is real simple. Just give yourself a limit for how long you're allowing yourself to work on an area. So like, for example, you might be like, okay, this face, I'm gonna work on this face for 30 minutes. Then I'm gonna move on over here. Then I'm gonna move on over here. Then I'm gonna move on over here. If you catch yourself and you start to become more cognizant over what you're doing and how long you're doing it, switch tasks. One of the worst things that I see all the time too is that people will just be a dead horse. They're like, I don't like this. This doesn't look right. That hand doesn't look right. And then it still doesn't look right. And then the next day it doesn't look right. And then a week later it still doesn't look right. Why are you doing that? It is such a waste of your time and energy to just beat that into hamburger instead of you just saying, okay, look, let me just take a break from that. I'm gonna come back over here, okay? Now I did that. I'm not really sure how that's gonna look. Okay, let me just take a pause from that, and I'll come on over here. And look, what this does is it prevents you from feeling resistance to your artwork. Because the worst thing, and tell me if you've ever felt this, if you ever felt like, man, I wanna work on my artwork. No, I don't. Actually, this is really hard. And then you start to do self-sabotaging techniques where you don't wanna work on art, where you're avoiding art, where you're just indulging in media consumption, where you're doing things that you actually don't care about, but you're pretending to because they give you quick dopamine hits. Are you struggling with this? Because one of the best things I learned is that if I'm struggling or frustrated with one area, I've got loads of other areas that I could work on too. And then I can just come back to that. Or maybe I need to look up a new reference. Maybe I need to look up a new resource. But one of the worst things I'm gonna warn you about soon in this video is why you stepping away from it is actually gonna be the worst decision for you, especially as a perfectionist. And that's all because of this force of resistance. Have you ever encountered that? Now, as you're gonna be feeling dejected and you're gonna be feeling like it's not good enough, everything that you make isn't quite to your level, or you're looking at like, okay, well, this part of the artwork is amazing, this part sucks. And then you start to lose your drive for actually finishing the piece. And then you wanna start to quit, right? And this is what perfectionism generally looks like as a cycle. You generally are really high in the beginning on your energy, and then you hit a really big low at some point. And I generally noticed in my artwork a lot that I had like a lot of inequalities. In other words, certain areas were really well developed and other areas weren't. And I would like certain aspects and I would really hate certain aspects. And I see this a lot in my client-based work. Like if you didn't know this, I feel intense anxiety every single time that I start a project, and I feel intense anxiety, like especially towards the middle of a project. And I'll talk to you about why that happens later on. And one thing that's really shaped my overall approach to my art making, and you might want to consider this too, every single time that I'm making some level of effort, it's actually helping you, even if it doesn't look perfect. You are not failing and starting from nothing every single time that you pick up that artwork. No, friend. You're actually starting from experience. And that's one of the key things that I had a really rough time learning, was that even if that face looked busted, even if the hands were jacked up, even if the proportions just didn't make sense, that gave me a starting point, and that gave me something I could then improve upon. And one of the things that I also do too, and you might want to start with this too, is that you can definitely start to revisit some of your older pieces every like 6 to 12 months. And that's one of the processes that I really enjoy myself too. And what that gives me with is the ability to look back at the things that I've done and consider where I can go from it. And even if what you do isn't the best version of it, you don't start from nothing, you start with experience. And starting from experience enables you to proceed forward with wisdom, because the more you create, the wiser that you get. Have you ever considered that? Or are you not being gentle enough on yourself and you're thinking that every single time that something doesn't hit perfectly the first time, that's why you're not worth it, and that's why you're convincing yourself that art's not for you? Is this you? Now, as you're going through this cycle, and while you're adopting and you're exhibiting your perfectionist tendencies, okay, this produces an extreme emotional roller coaster, doesn't it? You're like, yay, no, woohoo, oh God, no. And you are exhibiting these extreme high lows that you just can't control, right? And I used to have this issue too, where I would be extremely elated and then I would hate it and I would never want to see it again. And then compounding all that, then you're going to start to, because you don't like what you're doing, then your perfectionism and your procrastination is going to tell you that you're tired, that you should be doing something else, that you should be putting it off. And then you're thinking that, well, this isn't good for my mental health. Then you're going to tell yourself that, well, I need to think about my feelings and I need to really sort this thing out. And my friend, I really want to let you know this, and I'm telling you this from the bottom of my heart because it's something that I had to learn the hard way, and I think that more artists should really heavily consider, just like you, is this: screw your feelings and screw your energy. These are the two biggest liars that are never going to help you in your art or in your life. And here's what I mean by that. At no point when I say screw your feelings and how you feel, are you ever going to be plagued with this like extreme euphoria. Like at no point are you just like, well, sure, I can't work on this art because I'm just so happy. Everything's so great. Everything's unicorns, puppies, and rainbows. Everything's awesome. No, you're like, I'm too sad. I'm too anxious. I'm too fraught with peril over how this artwork is. And I'm just doubting myself the entire time, okay? Look, your negative feelings are not meant to help you, friend. They're actually just there and exist strictly because they perceive your artwork and what you're doing at that time as a threat. Which, is it a threat? No. Are you gonna die from your artwork? Man, I sure hope not. But look, I've never had a paintbrush attack me either. So look, if you're feeling that way, that's also emotional resistance. Your emotions come up just to keep you comfortable in that comfort zone where you don't actually grow. But listen, where the real work starts in art is once it starts to get hard, not when it's easy, not when it starts, and definitely not at the concept level either. That's the simple part. And then two, you're gonna be talking about your energy. You're gonna be like, oh, I don't have the energy, I don't have the motivation, I'm too sleepy, I'm too tired for this. And look, most of the time, you're actually A-okay fine. But the thought of that and that physical resistance towards it is actually the culprit of your energy. So the way that you can very easily get around this, and I promise you, if you try this, it's gonna blow away all of your reservations, all of your lack of energy, because it's worked for me and hundreds of people just like you too. It's called the 30-minute rule. The next time that you're feeling like you just have no energy, there's no way that you could possibly create right now, just sit down for 30 minutes, and at the end of 30 minutes, sure, go ahead, walk away. But I promise you this, because this is typically how it goes for everybody that I've ever had try this, is that you typically are blazing ahead longer than 30 minutes, like an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. This has been my practice with it and other people. And most of the time, why this is so effective is because the initial resistance of starting that work, of actually putting in more time into it, that's the real reason that you feel that way. And your body and your mind are kind of rebelling against you. So you have to fight back against it. And this is one of the best strategies I've ever developed and had people seen massive success with it too. And I know it'll work for you too. Try it out. Now look, one of the most important things that you have to do and you have to see, and if you really are struggling with perfectionism and you're just lost in this cage where you just feel trapped, and you want to stop this, you want to grow, you want to be a better artist, right? We need to examine, why do you feel that way? And you might think that it's just a skill issue, you might think it's a confidence issue, and both of those are partial truths. And here's what it really is. You just don't trust yourself. And most people think that confidence is just born, it's just innate, like, oh, they're just built different, but no, friend. At the core of What allows you to move forward and to embolden your process, or to try new things, or to do things better or differently? You need to make efforts that are going to combat this. And here's what it basically looks like. A lot of times when I talk to artists, they have so much energy, enthusiasm, and so much happiness over the thought of something. And I just want to let you know this: thoughts are worthless. Your ideas are worthless. What actually makes you a standout artist isn't your idea, friend. I think a lot of people have deluded us into thinking this, but it's not the truth, y'all. It is your labor. And one of the things that you are going to do, the more that you continue to labor towards being an artist, is you have to learn how you doing little tasks and little actions builds trust, appreciation, and love for yourself. And the biggest influence for this is definitely your process. So like for me personally, at the beginning of every single project I do, man, I feel massive stress and anxiety. I feel avoidance. I feel intense resistance towards it. And I feel like everything I do is just not good enough. And what I'm a big fan of too is just doing micro bursts of productivity. So like one day I might just look at preferences, and then the next day I might organize that and go ahead and get some more based on some other things. I might explore some ideas on it too. And then I'll start a really disgustingly rough sketch. And then from there, I'll kind of do a slightly 50% more refined sketch. And then from there, I'll do a more refined sketch. And then from there, I'll actually make it look finished and polished. And then from there, I'll rock into the rest of my process. And what I want to urge you on is to consider this. Everything that you do, every single minor and major task is building trust in yourself that you can do this, that you can make efforts for. And that big time also is important for finishing your work. Are you somebody that never does that because of your perfectionism? When you finish something, when you accomplish something, when you actually make efforts and you work for something, especially in your artwork, you're proving to yourself, I can do this, I can do that. That's at the core of confidence. That's at the core of how you're going to get better. Conversely though, every single time that you don't do it, that you delude yourself into thinking that somehow thinking about your artwork is going to make you a better artist, every single time that you don't follow through, you're actually proving that you don't have trust in yourself and that you don't do it. See, you're actually conditioning yourself to either win or fail. And you got to combat that with just simple daily tasks, however major or minor. Try it out. Now, one thing that I tend to notice a lot of perfectionists struggle with is this idea of art block. Have you ever felt this way? Have you ever felt like, man, there's just nothing I can do. I've just hit this brick wall. There's no way I could possibly proceed forward with that. And I just want to let you know, this is one of the biggest lies that we've all been told, because actually there's no such thing as art block, friend. And to prove it, I made an entire video for you right here. Go ahead and check it out. If this helped you, share it with somebody that you know. Thanks so much. See you next time.